Good evening. Good evening. I'm Dr. Ed Welch, President of the University of Charleston, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the University of Charleston and to welcome you to the University of Charleston Speaker Series. This is year 13 of the Speaker Series and year 13 that the Dow Chemical Foundation has supported this series, and we're very grateful to them for doing that. Here tonight representing Dow Chemical is Gary Cashier. So on behalf of all of us, we thank Gary and we thank Dow Chemical for their support of this series. And tonight we had special support from some of these folks sitting in the front rows, from members of the Young Presidents Organization, YPO, and we're grateful for your being here. I would invite all of you to turn off the noisemakers. You know what that speech is all about, but it is polite to everyone else for you to do that. We do take written questions, so if you have questions, I hope either you have a card or if you really want one, raise a hand. We'll see that you get a card. Pass those cards to the aisles and we will pick them up. And sample questions of what you ask will be given to me, and I will give them to the speaker at the end of his comments. We try to ask as many questions as we can, but sometimes you write more than we can get to, and I apologize to you if we don't get to ask your particular question. Larry Sabato is the Robert Kent Gooch Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia. I'm going to say that term again, but for those of you who like UVA, you get one chance to say, yes, I'm from UVA. So, University of Virginia. Okay. He is the director of its Center for Politics. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa from UVA in 1974 with a degree in government. He studied at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs and was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship in 1975. He earned his doctoral degree in politics from Oxford University and became a member of the faculty at UVA in 1978. He is the author of 24 books and countless essays on politics. His latest book was a newly released volume on the midterm of elections in 2010 entitled Pendulum Swing. He has been called the most quoted college professor in the land by the Wall Street Journal. It's a very fascinating title, of which many others probably are jealous. He's also been noted as the most accurate political prognosticator by MSNBC, CNBC, and Pew's Project for Excellence in Journalism. In July 2008, he forecast the outcomes of the 2008 presidential election, missing the final electoral college count by just one vote, and exactly forecasting Obama's 53% popular vote. In 2006, 8, and 10 elections, he accurately predicted 98% of the Senate, House, and governor winners. It's widely reported that we are now in an election year. And if that's true, it's really fortuitous that the University of Charleston scheduled this speaker at this date. So please, if you will, welcome to West Virginia, our neighbor from Virginia, Larry Sabato.
Thank you very much, Ed. Appreciate that. Mr. President, thank you so much. I appreciate that, just visiting with him in his office there, and I love that piece of stone that he has on which is written the one word, nothing. Nothing is written in stone, except in this case, nothing really is written in stone. But this is a great introduction for my speech, because let me tell you something, none of my predictions are written in stone. We've got a month to go before the election, and a lot of things will happen. that I can't imagine. It's a failure of imagination on my part. But I will tell you what I know. I will project the things that I can project, and I know you will understand when I can't project something. Maybe you can. You know, a lot of people in politics are awfully certain about just about everything. So something tells me there are going to be people here who can contradict me or tell me, set me straight, I should say. Now, I do have certain tools in the business of prognostication. And some of you may be familiar with one of these tools, and I decided, since you were neighbors and good friends, I have relatives that live in the Bluefield area, I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and show them how we make a lot of these predictions down at the University of Virginia, over at the University of Virginia. It's a nice ride on the interstate. It's not bad at all. So I brought it with me, because I want you to be able to do it too. Now, I don't know how many of you recall this from your childhood. This is my crystal ball. And I'm just going to get right to it, because I know this is what you want. You want to know, is President Obama going to be reelected? Ask again later. See, that's what it always says. That's what it always says. So I can't be held accountable when my own crystal ball won't tell me anything. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here because, unlike my Cavaliers at the University of Virginia, I see we have some Wahoos here. Your football team's doing a heck of a lot better. So I salute the Golden Eagles, and I hope you'll pray for the Cavaliers. Things are so bad there that our new practice facility that was supposed to open up in February burned down yesterday. I mean, talk about bad luck. But we're going to talk about politics, not football. There are a lot of similarities between the two, but we're going to talk about politics. And we're going to do it in a way that I hope is interesting, and I'm looking forward to your questions. You may have noticed we've had a debate. You may have. How many of you watched that debate? Let me see your hands. My goodness, you are politically interested and active. Almost everybody was watching it. Well, before the debate, a number of pollsters asked people, who do you expect to win? And it was about 3-1 that President Obama would win the debate. And really it was a hands down kind of thing. Well, he's so eloquent and well-spoken and so on. And Romney, I kind of don't like him. He's cold. So it's obvious who's going to win these things. And that's exactly where you don't want to be for a debate. You do not want to be the one who is benefiting from pre-debate expectations. You want to be the one everyone's saying is going to lose. And so President Obama went into it with everybody thinking he would win. Not only did he not win, he turned in one of the worst performances ever. And it is a performance. So I'm using the right noun. It's a performance. But it was one of the worst performances ever by a presidential nominee. And I've watched them all since the original ones in 1960. And they don't get much worse. So it's not a surprise that that has moved the needle. This is a very different race than it was 10 days ago. 10 days ago, we were on a glide path to having President Obama reelected. Don't believe, what you may see some places about, the polls are off and we're really winning. No. This was headed toward not a landslide. It was headed toward a very similar result to 2004 when you had another polarizing president. President Obama was polarizing. President George W. Bush was polarizing, running for re-election against a personality-challenged guy from Massachusetts. Not Mitt Romney, but John Kerry. And lots of things happened in the campaign, but in the end, President Bush won by 3 points, 51-48. It was one of the closest re-election races, successful re-elections for a president in modern history. And we were really on the same glide path until this debate. Now, it may be, depending on the results of the other two debates, and I don't know what's going to happen. Just like you, I'm going to tune in with my popcorn and my iPad open to Twitter so that I can send out these obnoxious tweets that everybody sends out. We're not watching the debate anymore. We're reading one another's tweets, which is not a good thing. But I'm going to contribute to the madness and do the very same thing. But I'm going to be tuning in because I don't know what's going to happen. But it really matters now. because I think people's expectations have changed. And they've changed in lots of ways. Of course, now they've seen President Obama do very poorly in a debate. Maybe they expect Mitt Romney to win the next two handily. And you may not be able to do the same thing twice or three times. I think Mitt Romney has to do well in those two debates to make up the ground that needed to be made up in the key swing states. Not in the national polls, but in the key swing states. If he does it, then he will have pulled off an upset. If he does not do it, then I expect us to return to that pre-debate glide path. And I'm going to be just as surprised as you are by the results. We're all going to have to watch together. And of course, depending on our partisan identification, we may see one thing or another. But it's the national polls and people in the middle, and there aren't that many, but a few of them will probably decide the election in the states that are really, really close. It's what they see that will determine the outcome. Well, you know, we're in a situation in 2012 that is unusual for a presidential election. Normally, presidents are either clearly headed for defeat or they're clearly headed toward a landslide re-election. That's been American history. But that isn't true this year because of the fundamentals. And the fundamentals include an economy that's rocky. It's not terrible, but it's rocky. If you doubt that, I want you to think back to Jimmy Carter in 1980, an incumbent who was defeated after one term. And Jimmy Carter had an economy where the interest rates were double digits in the teens through the roof. You had inflation skyrocketing during the election year of 1980. You had an economy that contracted 7.9% in the second quarter, which is the key quarter politically. When voters are evaluating the economy, they look to that second quarter, the end of March to the end of June, to set themselves, not necessarily in stone, but to set their compass for the election season. And then you had the Iranian hostage situation. The hostages seized 1 year to the day before the election. The negotiations to free them seemingly making progress and then collapsing on the Sunday before the Tuesday general election. It couldn't have been any worse for Jimmy Carter, and he lost in a landslide. We don't have that this year. That's why some of these projections you've seen on television are just simply wrong. This is not going to be another 1980. This election is going to be close. Whichever way it turns out, it will be 1, 2, 3 points. It's going to be close. It's not like 1980. It's not like a lot of other elections, and I'll discuss some of them a little bit later. But it's going to be determined by the real events, the real impressions that people have of the candidates and the conditions that exist in 2012. And the conditions are, instead of Carter's minus 7.9% GDP contraction in the second quarter, you had growth, tiny little growth in the GDP of 1.3% in the second quarter. Usually, a president wants 3% or better, 3% growth or better in the second quarter in order to be reelected. President Obama doesn't have it, but it's in the gray area. It's not in recession territory either. And of course, interest rates are low and inflation is low and some other economic indicators are relatively good. So this is not an election that's predetermined. It's not pre-cooked. The cake is not baked. And often our elections are pre-baked cakes, like 1996. That was a pre-baked cake, the Clinton-Dole election. That was no election at all. It was over before it began. Or Reagan's re-election in 1984. That was a pre-baked cake. And a poor debate performance by President Reagan in the first debate wasn't going to change much of anything, and it didn't. Or Richard Nixon's re-election in 1972, another pre-baked cake. So we don't have that this year. And that's why this campaign is really worth following, because most of what we see, most of the major events we see really matter. Now, as we're looking at the campaign, there are pluses and minuses for both of the candidates. I'm not going to go through all of them because some are very obvious. But I would point out for President Obama, if he ends up winning re-election, remember two things that made a difference in historical terms. He was unopposed for renomination by a serious candidate. Yes, I know what the vote was here in the primary. I know about that inmate, not a serious candidate. He didn't have to organize, he didn't have to spend money, he didn't have to have the volunteers and the party foot workers divided during the campaign, having to choose up sides between two Democrats. Think back through the 20th century. Every president who lost re-election was opposed seriously for renomination. It really does matter if they're opposed or unopposed for renomination. Obama got lucky. For a while, the left was thinking about opposing him. They were unhappy about health care and some other things. They didn't think he went far enough. But they decided in the end not to do it. It really matters. The other factor that's related to history that really helps Obama is that this is the first term for the Democrats in the White House. Now, I mentioned Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter has a very special status. As you trace through the 20th century and this piece of the 21st, you'll find that his was the only case of a party losing the White House after getting a lease on it of just one term, just 4 years. And there's a reason for that. It is much more difficult to eject a party after just 4 years, especially, as is almost always the case, if they had an unpopular predecessor from the other party. President Bush has stepped back from the public scene. He's left public affairs and politics for the most part. It's a surprise to me that he's still in the 30s. His popularity is still in the 30s. People still hold him accountable for the economic collapse, the unpopular war in Iraq, and other things. So the conditions are just right for Obama. And he can say, yes, things aren't going as well as I would like. Things haven't improved as much as I wish they had, but look at the mess I inherited. And it works if you've been in for only 4 years. It's a joke if your party's been in for 8 years. I mean, people won't buy it at all. But the middle-of-the-road buyers will, middle-of-the-road voters will buy that excuse if it's been a one-term presidency. So it's very interesting to see that work. And you saw the Democratic convention. And the star speaker was not Barack Obama. The star speaker was Bill Clinton. And what was the key line in Clinton's speech? That went on and on and on. You know, it went on twice as long as it was supposed to because he kept ad-libbing. He was enjoying this so much that Barack Obama, who had defeated his wife, was depending on him, the bill, to sell Obama. Oh, it was sweet. Oh, it was sweet. You know, you saw that on Bill Clinton's face, didn't you? But what was that key line? He said, no president could have fixed the problems left by that last administration in just 4 years. Not even me. I was there. I always go to both party conventions, and we were right facing Bill Clinton, and I just laughed and laughed. It was the perfect Clinton line, and it was something he clearly worked on. So those are two key reasons, and they help President Obama if he gets that narrow re-election. Remember those two factors. What about Romney? Well, he can capitalize on the bad situation that does exist. This certainly isn't a happy economy, that's for sure. And all those promises and all that hope and all that change and all the rest of it hasn't changed the reality for many Americans. And so those who are unhappy, those who believed in the promises in 2008 are naturally ready to vote for the opponent. Pretty much anybody who's respectable on the other side. And Romney is. Yes, Republicans had to be dragged kicking and screaming to nominate him. But he was the only person, really, seriously, thinking through who was running for the Republican nomination. Romney was the only choice who could potentially win in November. I mean, the others just had too many problems of one sort or another. My friend Newt Gingrich, who I saw in D.C. a week ago, and I always love talking with him. I don't say talking to him, it's talking with him, because basically you listen to Newt and then you say, that's brilliant, Newt. That's a conversation with Newt. And usually it is brilliant. But, you know, that's the conversation. But, you know, Newt has enough baggage for the cargo hold of a 747. You know, he would not have won a general election. So the Republicans picked the right candidate who could compete in the fall. And he has a perfect profile. If you look at the resume for this general election, he's Mr. Fix-It. If he'd ever present himself quite that way consistently, he hasn't done it. But he's a businessman, business background, for a bad economy, Mr. Fix-It, state experience, no federal. He was lucky he lost the race to Ted Kennedy in 1994 in Massachusetts. He has no responsibility for anything the federal government has ever done. So he can run against anything the federal government is doing or stands for with credibility, doesn't have fingerprints on it. And he has a remarkably unified party. Now, let's be honest. They're not that crazy about him. They're not in love with him. They're never going to be in love with him for a combination of reasons. But it doesn't matter because Barack Obama, being a polarizer like George W. Bush, and yes, like Bill Clinton, everybody thinks Bill Clinton's terrific today. He was a polarizer in the 1990s. He never got 50% of the vote in the 1990s. We've had 3 polarizing presidents in a row. Polarizing presidents create 48% of the vote for their opponent. The opponent doesn't have to lift a finger. They automatically inherit 48%. They have to win the additional 2 on their own. And that's the toughest 2 to get. It is absolutely the toughest 2 to get. So those are the pluses. The minuses, I've already mentioned most of Obama's, although he has to worry, even in this last month, that something could happen, particularly in the Eurozone. Did you see any riots today? You saw that on television. He has to worry that something's going to happen over there that will send the world economy into a tailspin. It isn't going to take much. And if it does happen, and it's apparent to people that it's happening, they may do what they did in the case of Jimmy Carter, not necessarily producing a landslide, but when the Iranian hostage negotiations collapsed, most people literally threw up their hands and said, that's it, I can't take it anymore. And that's when they voted for Reagan. Remember, Reagan was only ahead 2 points on the weekend before the election. He would have won, but it would have been a narrow victory. It was the collapse of the Iranian hostages that took his 2-point margin and expanded it to 10 full points, 51 to 41. Well, sometimes there's a triggering event that causes people to shift their political views, especially at the last minute. You know, we often think of October surprises as being generated by an incumbent administration in order to save themselves. But October surprises can be a surprise to the incumbent administration. It can happen the other way too. And you never know. People have said, well, what are they? And the answer is, I don't know. That's why they're surprises. So we're going to have to wait and see. I'll suggest some in just a moment. For Romney, he does have a frosty persona. He is hard to warm up to. I think the debate helped. The convention was a missed opportunity, my goodness. He had some great segments, and they were all in non-prime time. You would have had to have been a C-SPAN junkie to pick them up. You know, and I like C-SPAN. It's a great thing, but not that many people watch C-SPAN 24 hours a day. But they were there, and he's just getting into it now. Some of the personal stories and, you know, the very personal stories that can be told about him, but it should have been done back in the summer. That was the time to do that. I got to be honest with you. I have always thought of both of these candidates as cold. Now, I can say this in West Virginia because even though sometimes you're associated with the North because you made that terrible decision to break off from Virginia a long time ago, and I know you regret it. I know you regret that. And it's understood, and we just accept it. And Virginia, we know you're unhappy, and we wish we could do something about it, but it's too late. You are really Southern, just like we are in Virginia, at least south of Northern Virginia. We are still Southern. And I thought that these two, Obama and Romney, were very Northern in their approach. That they're a little chilly in their disposition. The two of them together could probably solve our problem with global warming if we let them talk long enough. But Romney in particular seems to have a problem with being frosty, and he's flip-flopped on loads of issues because he ran for governor in Massachusetts and had to get elected there. And if you're a Republican in Massachusetts, you have to be liberal on social issues. You can be conservative on fiscal issues, but you have to be liberal on social issues. Well, to get the Republican nomination for president, he had to flip-flop 180 degrees on the social issues, because you can't get nominated for president in the Republican Party unless you're conservative on social issues. That's the genesis of his flip-flops. Now, a lot of people say that he's going to be damaged by Mormonism. I don't agree. There are places where Mormonism will lose him votes, but there are places where a Republican nominee running against Barack Obama is going to do very, very well. And so throughout the South and the border states, where I have met people have come up to me and said, during the primaries mainly, I cannot vote for Mitt Romney because he's a member of that cult. That's a cult, quote unquote. I said, well, suppose he's the nominee and he's running against Barack Obama. And they all say, oh, yeah, well, I'll vote for him then. Well, then I said, well, no, you will vote for him under some circumstances. And sure enough, that's what's happened mainly. But if you lose 1% or 2% in one of these states, it doesn't matter under our electoral college system. What difference does it make if you get 60% versus 58%? You're still going to get 100% of the electoral college votes from that particular state. So I don't think that's much of a negative. I don't think it's going to make that much difference. This is an election mainly about an incumbent. It always is when an incumbent runs for re-election. Always. The challenger is there. The challenger has to pass the basic Oval Office test. What is it? Can people imagine that person sitting in the Oval Office for 4 years, being in their living rooms every night for 4 years without them going bonkers? That's the Oval Office test. The side test is, the corollary is, they want to imagine the person sitting there without getting us into an unnecessary war, especially now. I think we're kind of worn out. So people apply this Oval Office test. Personally, I think Romney passes it. He may not pass it with flying colors for everybody. Nobody ever does. But he basically passes the Oval Office test. So then the focus comes back to the incumbent. Now, what's the incumbent to do? Well, he's had 2 role models. He was going to be like one or the other from the very beginning. And from the beginning, I've asked, will he be more like Jimmy Carter, the dour Jimmy Carter, who was truly the unluckiest president since Herbert Hoover? I mean, everything that could have happened, happened. It didn't rain frogs and, you know, the rivers didn't turn into blood, but basically a lot of really bad things happened during that 4 years. He was tremendously unlucky. Versus Sonny Bill. Sonny Bill, first 2 years he had a bad economy, but what did it get him? It got him a Republican Congress that helped him because he'd gone too far to the left. And so they dragged him back to the middle. And he got a welfare reform bill working with Congress, and he got a crime control bill working with Congress, and he got a balanced budget working with Congress. And because he was so much better at politics than Bob Dole or Newt Gingrich, he got all the credit, right? And then the economy improved, and in 1996, he was reelected handily. Talk about luck. He even timed his sex scandals for non-election years. Maybe that's skill rather than luck. I don't know. I don't know. But I kept thinking, which one is Barack Obama more like? And for the longest time, he was turning, in my mind, into Jimmy Carter. And then somebody got to him, or he thought of him himself, I don't know. But he figured out he had to be more like Bill Clinton. And that's when the call went out to Bill Clinton, or rather, I understand they played golf together. And he let Clinton cheat. Clinton won the round. But the point was, Obama realized he needed Clinton, and he needed to be more like Clinton. And at least until the first debate, he was. Bill Clinton would never have turned in a debate performance like that. He would have been all over Mitt Romney. You know that. Not that Romney would have folded, but I'm just saying it would have been a much more even enterprise. But until that first debate, I think Obama was much more like Bill Clinton. Now, you know, it's for a while there, it was more like Clinton again, more like Carter again. But he's trying to get back to Bill Clinton, and that's going to be a determinant of the election. Will he look like Bill Clinton by election day? Now, there are plenty of things that could happen that would change things, and we hope there won't be a war. I don't think there will be, and here's why. We all know where the war would be, in what country, in the Middle East. And we know which other country in the Middle East would probably start it, maybe for a good reason, maybe not, depending on your point of view. And I don't want to get into an argument about that. But we would be held accountable for it. We'd have to provide the air cover. We'd be the great Satan again. You know what would happen. We've been through it a lot of times since the 1970s. Would that help or hurt the incumbent? We're so close to the election, there would probably be a rally around the flag effect. It would probably help Obama. It would be a while before people recognize the consequences, like skyrocketing gas prices and our diplomats and just about everybody else traveling abroad in danger, increased terrorism, and all the rest of it. So my sense of it is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, disliking President Obama as much as he does, will not want to do anything that will benefit President Obama in the election. Therefore, if something happens, and we hope it doesn't, but if something happens with Iran, it will be after the election. So I doubt that happens, but you never know. Sometimes there are shots fired, and these conflicts take on a life of their own. There's nothing you can do. There will be more gaffes. I mean, we've got a vice presidential debate on Thursday. I'm mainly tuning in to go on gaffe patrol for Joe Biden. It's a full-time job. You never know what he's going to say. And, you know, one day I would publish a book called The Book of Biden Gaffes, but it'd be as long as War and Peace. I don't think it would sell. It'd be a lot less eloquent than War and Peace. And Paul Ryan has never been on the national stage. You never know how someone's going to do in that circumstance. And he's no Sarah Palin. Doesn't look a thing like her from 4 years ago. So it's a sideshow, though. Remember that. I want you to tune in. It's important to watch. We have a history, 9 of them, vice presidents becoming president without an election in American history, so you absolutely should watch. But it's more of a curiosity. It does not determine votes in a general election. People are going to vote for president, for one of the presidential candidates, and the vice presidential nominees just come along for the ride. But the long and short of it is that they'll make gaffes. The presidential candidates will make gaffes. But I think we're gaffed out. We're at the point where gaffes aren't going to make that much difference either. Think about how you react to gaffes. Think about it. When your candidate commits a gaffe, what's your response? Don't you say, I know what he meant. What is wrong with the media jumping all over him like that? They're making a big deal out of nothing, right? Whereas when the other candidate commits a gaffe, you turn to your friends and family and say, you see, he's an idiot, I've told you. But it doesn't change any votes. It just reaffirms where you are anyway. And so I don't think it's going to make that much difference. Now, I'll tell you what might make a difference. It's little things. And I keep up with these on a daily basis at my Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. We follow politics in all 50 states and the presidential contest. And little things can make a difference if they happen in swing states. And there aren't that many swing states. There are about 8 of them. We'll go over them at the end. In Ohio, a judge has now ordered 3 days of late in-person voting. It's a big plus for the Democrats. It means net about 30,000 additional votes for President Obama. It's a little thing, and Ohio has millions of voters. But if it's a really close race, that could be the election. In Virginia, we have an independent candidate running for president on the Constitution Party ticket who's a very conservative Republican, served in Congress for many years and the state Senate before that. He's very popular. His district is right on the North Carolina border. He's not going to get that many votes, but he could get 25, 30,000 in Virginia, another very close state, a close swing state, and you never know if it'll make the difference. And I can guarantee you the large majority of his votes will come out of Mitt Romney's category. You're not going to find many Obama voters voting for a conservative Republican candidate for president. Then in Nevada, another swing state that's very, very close, a couple of points one way or the other, a judge orders none of the above on the ballot again. There's a long history of none of the above being on the Nevada ballot. It's one of my favorite candidates, none of the above. Probably for you too, depending on the election. But what does none of the above do? It helps an incumbent. Incumbents love that line. They always want it on the ballot there because it divides the opposition. If you're unhappy, you're probably going to vote against the incumbent. None of the above gives you two choices, the challenger and the none of the above line. So it helps the incumbent. There are burrowed into the electoral slates for the Republicans across the country, there are quite a number of Ron Paul supporters. And media reports have suggested that some of them intend to vote for Ron Paul, which under the Constitution they have a right to do. An elector can vote for anyone. By the way, we need to change that. We don't like constitutional amendments, but we really need to make the electoral votes cast automatically to eliminate this silliness called faithless electors, where people who are unknown on the ballot, nobody knows who these people are. For the most part, I probably offended an elector in the room. I don't mean you, sir, whoever you are in the room. You are a known elector. But most of these electors that you actually vote for when you vote for president, they're anonymous. We don't know who they are. We expect them to follow our vote. They're supposed to vote for the candidate a majority of people vote for, a plurality of people vote for. They don't have to. They don't have to. And so if you have enough defectors, you know what that means. Now, I could throw it into the House, and if the House stays Republican by a wide enough margin, maybe Romney would win it anyway. But it's a danger that, it's a threat you don't want to see. And then Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, two other states that might be close. The new voter ID law that was designed, frankly, to help the Republican nominee and hurt the Democratic nominee, it's been checkmated and neutralized for this particular election. These are all pluses for the Democratic nominee, the Democratic ticket. There's no way to avoid this. That doesn't mean Romney can't win. It just means he has all these additional obstacles in his way to winning. If people feel strongly enough, they sweep the obstacles away. Now, I told you I was going to talk to you about what election is this most like. And a lot of people say, oh, isn't this like 1992? It's the economy, stupid. That's when George H.W. Bush was defeated by Bill Clinton. But George H.W. Bush was defeated more by Ross Perot than anything else. And last I checked, he was happy in retirement in Texas. Not George H.W. Bush, but Ross Perot. He's not running. We don't have a Ross Perot this year. It's not really like 1992. Hey, this could be another squeaker. You never know. We have them with some frequency in our polarized nation. You just never know. My nightmare is that it would be Virginia. We're close. You never know when 537 votes will determine an election, and then we'll become home to every lawyer in America. That would truly be a nightmare. I hope you'll agree with me there. We don't want that. Apologies to all the lawyers. Don't sue me. I'm just kidding. It was absolutely a joke. You know I didn't mean that. But we don't want a close election because it can go on for weeks and weeks and divide the country further and so on, but it's possible. And as I suggested to you, I think this was more like 2004 than any other election, 51 to 48, but the debates may be changing it. So I don't know that this is like any other election. We may be in new territory. Now, what can Romney do to win? This was more of a question pre-debate than it is now, but we'll ask it anyway. And they're always simple answers, but I think they're very simple this year. You project the image of Mr. Fix-It, and you don't get off on dirt roads. You don't leave the interstate highway. The interstate highway, having just traveled on interstates all the way here, is the main road. Stay on the interstate. It's your path to victory. The dirt roads, the side roads, you're going to get lost, even with those new electronic devices that tell you where you're going. You're still going to get lost. Don't get off on other issues. Any day that's not spent on the economy is a wasted day between now and the election. The devastating debate performances have already happened once, could happen twice and three times. And I think the better use of money, frankly, is for voter contact and get out the vote. It's not for television advertising. I assume because some of the media markets bleed over into West Virginia, you're seeing a lot of the ads. And I know those of us who live in swing states are just about to go out of our gourds because you'll have 10 political ads in a row, every one of them negative, at every single commercial break. This is my field, and I live by the mute button. It's the only thing that's saving my sanity and got me here tonight. It's a waste of money. We have reached the point of diminishing returns with television advertising. How many times do you have to see the same ad to get the message? And it's wasted money. Now, you know, historically, Again, this is a plus for President Obama. When you look at the history of presidential elections from 1824 to the present, when we started popular elections, 1824, because incumbents who sought a second term have won about 2/3 of the time. 1/3 of the time, a little more than 1/3, 35% of the time, they've been defeated for re-election. So by about 2-to-1 odds, they've got the chance to win a second term. How'd you like to have those odds at a casino in Atlantic City or Las Vegas? They'll never give you those odds. So they're pretty good odds. On the other hand, a senator, his re-election, her re-election, based on modern history, they've got an 80% chance to get another term. Only about 20% of senators are defeated for re-election on average. House of Representatives, since World War II, 93% of them win re-election. So actually, presidents are the easiest public officials to beat. But it's still tough. It's still tough to do it. But it can be done, as our history proves. We've had enough defeated presidents. A lot of this really does come down to voter turnout. And this is what's interesting. We're going to have another high turnout election. It's going to be 60% or above. Don't know exactly where, but it'll be over 60%. 2004, it was 60%. 2008, it was 62%. Those were the best turnouts we've had since the 1960s. Finally, we're getting good turnouts. But it's the composition that matters. In 2008, the Democrats had an enormous edge. Republicans were depressed because of Bush. A lot of them didn't like McCain. The Democrats were energized by hope and change, and they turned out in record numbers. This year, so far, we're a month ahead of the election, but so far, Republicans are more energized than Democrats. Will it last? It really is going to depend on the debate performances. I saw Republican enthusiasm spike in every national poll after the first debate. They got excited. Their guy looked like a winner. Democrats got depressed. More of them said, well, I'm kind of busy this fall. Not going to turn out. Now, people change their minds constantly. You know that. So you never know from week to week where it's going to be. But with only a few exceptions this year, Republicans have been higher on the enthusiasm scale that we use in polling than Democrats. And that's good for Republicans. Now, it has to be a big differential to matter. Because again, you're focusing on about 8 swing states. But that's a good news for Republicans. What about the House of Representatives? It's staying Republican. Democrats will probably pick up a handful of seats. They need to pick up 25 net seats in the 435 seat House to take the House back. They're not going to get it. They're going to get anywhere from a low of 4 to a high of 15. They can't really go above that. We follow this daily at the Crystal Ball, and I can tell you right now, Republicans who need only 218 to control the House have 231. They already have 231 seats, leaning or likely or safe. Democrats have 190. There are 14 toss-ups in the whole country. You would think there would be more, but there's this little thing called redistricting. And incumbents across the country, really both parties in the state legislatures, have changed the system that James Madison designed. Originally, the voters picked their representatives. That is archaic. Now the representatives pick their voters. And this is a much more up-to-date system. I know you'll agree. It builds in security, job security for members of Congress. Don't you want job security? Of course you do. Why shouldn't they have job security too? They paid me to say that. Okay, just kidding. I don't agree with that at all. I wish it were different, but it's scheduled for reform on the 12th of never. So we need to get used to it because it's not going to change. Now, what about the Senate? This map is so confusing that I want you to stare at it, mesmerize yourself, and all go to sleep. And then I will tell you what you're going to do. But no, I won't do that. But long story short, the Democrats have 23 seats up this year. The Republicans have just 10. A year ago, we all thought, that is in my field, we thought the Republicans had a very good chance to take control of the Senate. Well, you know, if Romney ends up winning and he wins by a decent margin, it's still possible. But I have to say, it is looking more likely that the Democrats will retain control of the Senate. They control it today, 53 seats to 47 seats. Just about all the breaks have gone to the Democrats in these seats around the country. You've heard, I'm sure, of Todd Akin, the Republican nominee in Missouri, who's thrown away a seat that would automatically have gone Republican had there been another nominee other than a guy named Todd Akin. That's life. Things like that happen. And when you look at the whole country, and you look at the Senate in particular, and you add in the ones who are coming back automatically because they're not on the ballot this year, you have 45 Republicans, 49 Democrats, and 6 toss-ups a month ahead of the election. But the toss-ups are leaning in a particular way. The Connecticut seat, if I had to pick today, I'd say the Democrat would end up winning it because Obama's going to carry Connecticut by about 10 points. A lot of this is just coattail. In Massachusetts, Scott Brown, you remember him, the guy elected to Ted Kennedy's seat in the special election? If this were a midterm election, he'd win easily. We think he's going to lose. And we think he's going to lose because President Obama is winning Massachusetts about 60% to 40%. Yes, the state that Romney governed. But Romney knew he could never carry Massachusetts in a presidential election. But this means Scott Brown has to carry hundreds of thousands of Obama voters, has to get them to vote for him too. It's too polarized a year. So that probably goes to the Democrats. Montana, too tight to call. That is a complete toss-up. That'll be 2,000 to 3,000 votes in Montana, which means half the state. No, it's actually got more people than that. North Dakota should not be close at all. Romney's going to win that close to 60% of the vote. You'd think the Republican would win. I still bet the Republican would, but I would bet about 50 cents. He's turned out to be not a particularly good candidate. In Virginia, even if Romney wins Virginia, it'll be like 51-49, something like that. And it looks very likely now that the Democrat, Tim Kaine, is going to carry that seat. He's led 9 of the last 10 polls beyond the margin of error. Is there a chance it could change? Sure, there's a chance it could change between now and then. But right now, you'd have to tip that to the Democrats. And Wisconsin, big surprise to me, I had expected Republican Tommy Thompson to win that seat handily, and he's behind. And that's Paul Ryan's state, and that's Scott Walker's state. And part of it may be that Tommy's 70 years old, and running for a first term in the Senate at age 70 apparently is not appealing to some people in Wisconsin. So he's not doing as well as people in my field thought that he would do. So on the whole, I think Democrats have a good chance to retain control of the Senate. I can't give you an exact number today, but that's the way it's leaning. Now, I probably just depressed the Republicans in the audience. I didn't bring any Prozac with me, but I did bring this map, so you'll feel better. Because in 2014, you have an excellent chance to take control of the Senate. Yeah, I said this about 2012, a year ago, so keep that in mind. But the reason I say that is because it just so happens the seats coming up in 2014 are the most Republican combination of the 3 sets of seats that come up. And those red states, they're held by Republicans right now. Every one of them is a lock. They're a lock. And as far as I can determine, all the incumbents are running for re-election. So they're re-elected. They're heavily Republican states. Maine is the only exception, but the Republican there, Susan Collins, is very strong. She'll win another term easily. But I look at those blue states. There are 5 to 7 weak Democrats who are coming up in 2014. They were elected in Obama's year of 2008. And some weak Democrats won then because he pulled them in on coattail. They're very vulnerable, especially if President Obama is reelected. That's his 6th year itch. The midterm election of the 2nd term, it's usually a disaster for the president's party. So the Senate will very, very likely go Republican in 2014 if it doesn't this year. Now, we're getting to the end. We're getting to the Electoral College map. Right after this, there are third-party candidates on the ballot. I've already told you about Virgil Goode. There's Gary Johnson, 2-term governor of New Mexico, who's the Libertarian candidate. He only matters in one place, New Mexico. He has literally taken the state off the map. The Romney people had planned to contest it, had hoped to win it as George Bush did in 2004. But as a former governor there and taking mainly Republican votes, he's winning 5, 6, 7, 8%. It's gone. The Romney people have pulled out of New Mexico. So you see what I mean about the little things moving in one direction? And then you would think that President Obama could be hurt by Jill Stein. She's a very liberal candidate. She's the Green Party nominee. Now, you probably haven't heard of Jill Stein, but by November 6th, you will not have heard of her. And that's the problem. That's the reason it's not going to help Mitt Romney. Here's the electoral map. Couldn't be closer. And remember, this is as of today. It's our best guess as of today if the election were held today. We only have 3 totally unassigned states. And those states are New Hampshire, which is leaning slightly to Obama, Colorado, which is leaning slightly to Romney, helped by the debate, by the way, which was held in Denver. It got wall-to-wall coverage there, and Romney doing so well has helped him. And Virginia, which is absolutely 50-50, despite the polls you've seen. The private polls show it just dead even. That is really going to be close. So those are the three total toss-ups. We have Romney picking up states that President Obama carried in 2008. We have him picking up Indiana easily. That's flipped. That's already flipped. Missouri was very close. McCain very narrowly carried it. This is going to go heavily to Romney this year. North Carolina polls, even today, very, very close. We think Romney will carry it in the end. Critical 15 electoral votes. And the big one, Florida. There is no path to 270 for Romney without Florida. None. Again, the polls are very close. If you take the polling average, it's actually to Obama by a point or two. But we believe the debate dynamic has changed things enough so that we have put it, at least for now, in Romney's category. This produces a very tight result, 277, 235, with the 26 swing votes. So obviously, what? Romney, all that Obama has to do is hold what he's got. He doesn't have to win any of the 3. What Romney needs to do is to nail down New Hampshire, Virginia, Colorado, or some other combination like Iowa or Ohio, where he is today. He hasn't been doing well in Ohio. He's been doing more poorly there than most Republicans do, but that could change between now and November. Or Wisconsin, where Paul Ryan is from, but which to this point has been leaning rather heavily to Obama, or Nevada is another potential choice. But he's got to find 8 electoral votes that Obama already has leaning to him, and he's got to win the 26 that are still pure toss-ups. Is it doable? Absolutely. Are there more pathways in the Electoral College to 270 for President Obama? Obviously. That's for anybody who analyzes that map. They would say exactly that. So it's a close, competitive election. This is an election worth watching on a daily basis because some things we can't imagine right now may shift this map. If you want to keep up with it, we hope you will sign up for our Crystal Ball newsletter, which comes out at 6 a.m. every single Thursday. We update all the predictions and we show you all the current polls. It's a good thing. You only have to keep up with it once a week if you're busy. And most of all, best of all, it is absolutely free. And as I tell people, my site, my life is this crystal ball, but he who lives by the crystal ball ends up eating ground glass. And on that note, Mr. President, I'm going to take whatever questions these ladies and gentlemen have developed for me.
There are a few questions. Is the current system of an electoral college an idea that is past its prime? Is there another alternative?
The Electoral College. I'm glad that whoever asked me that question, thank you for asking it, because I have a book available on that subject. Makes a wonderful holiday gift. It's called A More Perfect Constitution, 23 Ways to Reform the Constitution, Bring it into the Current Day. And one of them is on the Electoral College. I have a different view. I say we should mend it and not end it. And there are ways to make the Electoral College more secure, including doing away with faithless electors and having electoral votes cast automatically, making the Electoral College more representative for the larger states. The larger states and even medium-sized states are unhappy because the small states get the 2 senatorial bonus votes. And so, for example, California, which has 70 times the population of Wyoming, gets 2 bonus votes in the Electoral College, and Wyoming 170th gets 2 bonus votes. And you add up all the small states, which are both Democratic and Republican, depending on the state, and they get 30 plus extra electoral votes. So I'm all in favor of some reform. Why don't I want to abolish it outright and go to pure popular vote? Because I remember the trauma of 2000. Now, I want you to imagine a national election, which has already happened. It happened in 1960, 119,000 votes separating John F. Kennedy, who I think used this auditorium to announce for president, right here. What an honor to be here in this very same place, and I'm going to see the video.
He kicked off his West Virginia
the West Virginia
primary
campaign,
here.
and he wouldn't have won the presidency without winning the West Virginia primary. So I'm excited to be right here in this historic place. But 119,000 votes between Kennedy and Nixon, or 1880, 10,000 votes in the entire country elected James A. Garfield. Very unlucky guy. I'm sure his family would have preferred that he lost, given that he was assassinated a few months later. But nonetheless, we have very, very close elections with some frequency. Do you know what would happen in this modern age if instead of 537 votes in Florida, we had 537 votes in the national vote count when the popular election determined the presidency without the filter of the Electoral College? We would never get a president, because every one of the 250,000 precincts in the United States would be swarmed by lawyers. And there would be so many lawsuits, they'd never be able to consolidate all of them in time for January 20th. Do you want an acting president? I don't. Under the Constitution, we'd probably end up with an acting president. It would take maybe half the term to figure out who actually won the presidency, if we ever figured it out. We can't afford that. The wonderful thing about the Electoral College is it isolates recounts in one or a few states, as it did in 2000. Yeah, Florida was messy. Take it national, and imagine what a colossal mess it would have been. So that's why I favor keeping the Electoral College.
If Obama wins re-election, what kind of pushback would there be in 2014 in those Senate and congressional races?
Well, as I mentioned, the 6th-year itch is one of our favorite concepts in political science, and there would be, I assume, even with a better economy, one hopes we would have it by 2014, though who knows if we go off the fiscal cliff. But I would expect a substantial 6th-year itch. And so probably Republicans would add a substantial number of House seats. They'd already controlled the House, I'm sure. They'd add even more House seats. And then in the Senate, I just showed you the map. So basically, President Obama's last 2 years would be just like President Bush's last 2 years when he had a Democratic House and Senate. He'd be traveling a lot, abroad, you know? They're foreign policy presidents under those circumstances.
Would you comment on the movie documentary 2016? Will that impact the election at all?
But the 2016, I don't want to spoil the storyline for those of you who haven't seen it. But look, the people going to see 2016 are overwhelmingly Republican activists and partisans. My guess is that somewhere between 99.8 and 99.9% of them are already voting for Romney. So, you know, maybe it increases their enthusiasm, but I just don't think it makes any difference. Just as I don't think this new movie that's being released on the weekend before the election about the capture of Osama bin Laden on the National Geographic Channel is going to have the slightest impact on the election, because by then you will have so few undecideds you could fit them in a phone booth.
Romney seems to be peaking late. Was this intentional? Is it wise course of action given the importance of early voting?
If it was intentional, it was brilliant, if it works. And believe me, they'll take credit for it in precisely those terms. This is the way we planned it all along. Because you got to sell those books, you know, after you elect a president. And I have nothing against people who are trying to sell their books. I think it's a perfectly legitimate, very American thing to do. Free enterprise. Okay.
You have any particular books in mind?
Well, there are 24 of them. We don't have time.
Oh.
But just Google my name.
The September issue of The Atlantic reports that a Harvard doctoral student has studied racial animus and concluded that no state ranks higher on this scale of racism than West Virginia. Can you comment on his method, or are you familiar with it?
I'm not familiar with it, and so I can't comment on it because I know nothing about it. I'd be happy to take a look at it and get you a comment if you want to email that to me. My email is sabato@virginia, spelled out like the state, .edu. But I can't comment on something I'm unfamiliar with.
Was Paul Ryan a good running mate choice for Romney? Should he have picked a more popular GOP hopeful like Rick Santorum? And will Ryan impact the election?
If Romney wins, Ryan was a brilliant choice. If Romney loses, you will have approximately 40 to 50,000 Republican leaders within 1 week explaining why they would have been a better vice presidential choice than Paul Ryan. Look, we studied this as well at the Crystal Ball, and we had originally had a pool of 41 potential vice presidential candidates for Romney that fit some category of what he needed. We kept narrowing it down from week to week, narrowing it down. We did this over months, and we came up with a final 5. And Paul Ryan was one of the 5. He was 5th. We had Marco Rubio higher than he was, and we had Chris Christie. Although I kind of reevaluated that at the Republican convention when Chris Christie gave the keynote, not for Mitt Romney, but for the Chris Christie in 2016 campaign. I did think that was inappropriate. It was a great speech, but it was just for the wrong candidate for this particular year. We had him on there. We had Tim Pawlenty, and we had Rob Portman. If I had been picking, I would have picked Portman. Why? Because I think Portman fits Ohio perfectly, and we had already suggested that Ohio was going to be a tough sell for Romney. Senator Portman from Ohio was perfect. And you go back in history, and of course a lot has changed since 1944, but Roosevelt was running for his last term. He won his last term easily, though less easily than he had won the other 3 terms. And there really was only one major state that Thomas E. Dewey, who was the nominee twice in 44 and 48, there was only one major state that Thomas E. Dewey turned from Roosevelt to the Dewey ticket. It was Ohio. How did he do it? He picked Governor Bricker of Ohio, and he won by 0.2%. And some of the same conditions applied. And we felt that Portman would be the choice to win Ohio. And what's the state causing Romney the most trouble that he really should win? Because no Republican has ever been elected president without winning Ohio. Ohio. So I have to say the crystal ball was right on that one. I will not tell you when we were wrong.
Do you consider it good politics for the Democrats to call Romney a liar?
It's such a nasty word. I don't like that word, personally. Never have for anybody. I think, prevaricator would be better. Most people won't know what that is. And by the time others look it up, they'll have changed the channel or something. So I would prefer that Democrats use the term prevaricator if they must. But, there's too much of that name-calling in politics on both sides. I wish we could stick more to issues and be a little friendlier in the presentation. And, a little humor goes a long way. I've seen a lot of candidates win with an appropriate application of humor. It may be digging at the opponent, but it's done in a way that lowers the temperature of politics. That's a good thing.
What impact do the health care changes have on the election?
Well, Obamacare, and I can now call it that because even President Obama says he likes the term. So Republicans like it, Democrats like it. We can now use the term Obamacare freely. Obamacare has solidified both the left for Obama and the right for Mitt Romney. And it is a big piece of the election campaign, but it's not nearly as big as the overall economy. Now, is it generating some Republican turnout? Sure, because there's one firm promise, really one above all, that Romney has made, and that is to abolish he has said, most of Obamacare. He's going to keep some of the provisions like young people being included on their parents' policies through age 26. But most of the provisions will be abolished, and he can probably do it as long as he gets a narrow majority in the Senate. He only needs 50 votes. You got a 51 through the VP. You put it in the reconciliation bill, which comes up very early in the Senate term. It's the only truly substantive vote that needs only 51 votes. Otherwise, you need 60. So you stick it in reconciliation, you can actually get it done. So I think the partisans are very excited about that.
Do you believe that your predictions have ever affected the outcome of a race? How could you be sure you do not negatively affect the outcome because people might lose hope of beating an incumbent?
Because no one really listens to me. That's easily answered. Nobody ever has, right? My friend Pat Graney, we went to college together. Nobody's ever listened to me. I just talk and talk and talk, and they let me go on because I enjoy it. Kind of like Bill Clinton that way, except he does affect things.
What impact does the issue of possible Supreme Court replacements have on voting?
You would think it would matter more. It should matter more. It's like me saying, lecturing to people and saying, you really ought to pay attention to foreign policy. It is extremely important, and we're not paying enough attention to it in this election, and we aren't. And it is very important, and I'm just talking to the wall because people don't really care very much about it. It's absolutely last on the list of voter concerns. I thought after what happened in Libya, it might go up on the list. Hasn't budged. Hasn't budged. It's dead last. And what did you ask me? I got off on that, on foreign policy.
Supreme Court replacement.
Supreme Court appointments. Hey, look at our modern history. Look how important every single appointee to the Supreme Court can be. And we have a closely balanced Supreme Court. The right vote, the right replacement could make a giant difference in a whole raft of cases. You would think people would be asking about that. When's the last time that ever came up in a campaign discussion? My guess is maybe there'll be a question in the town hall. It's not going to come up in the last debate. That's on foreign policy. The whole first debate was given over to the economy, which is very important. But couldn't we have had a segment on other domestic issues? So I'm hoping it comes up in the next debate, which is a town hall. That's the only chance for it even to be raised.
You've had a great record of making predictions. Do you have one that you missed that you regretted? And which prediction forecast are you most proud of?
Yes. I'm furious about the one electoral vote that we missed in 2008. It was Nebraska 2. That's the Omaha district, and I have pledged never again to visit Omaha. I will never go there again. They ruined my perfect electoral college record in 2008. They don't have a right to exist in my view. Another one this is funny. Another one that I missed this was in 2006. We had 36 governor's races. We only got one governor's race wrong, and it was Tim Pawlenty in Minnesota. I thought he was going to lose re-election, and he won. He won a plurality, but he won. And I apologized to him directly. I've had him to UVA. He's a great guy. He's a lot of fun. He ran for president. He didn't do well. But he pointed out to me that I owed him big. And so I introduced him. I said, fine, I'll make it up to you since I was wrong about that prediction. So I was giving the introduction to his speech. And I said, and now, as you know, he didn't succeed in the presidential contest, but I have a good feeling about his consideration by Mitt Romney. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the next vice president of the United States. And then Paul Ryan was announced the next day. I'll tell you just quickly, one other funny story about him, because Pawlenty has a great sense of humor. He was truly the next in line for McCain. He was originally going to be the choice, and then McCain came up with this idea of Sarah Palin. Don't want to get into it. Don't want to argue with anybody about it. She was picked. He was naturally disappointed. I happened to be in Minneapolis and ran into him the day Palin was picked. And he called me over. He whispered. He didn't want the reporters to hear it, so he whispered in my ear, and I'll tell you now because it's so old. He whispered in my ear, I was one chromosome away from being vice president.
You talked about a number of factors or surprises or things that could happen to impact the election. If you picked one that you would have us to look at or look for that you think might make a difference, what would be that one?
look, we were all surprised last Friday when the jobless rate dropped from 8.1 to 7.8. And again, I don't want to get into a discussion about whether the books were cooked, because I don't believe they were, but others here probably think they were, and so on. But we were surprised. That's the important thing. The final jobs report happens to be, just by accident, the Friday before the Tuesday election. Now, in American history, last-minute events have often turned elections, because if you have, say, 1%, if this is a very close election, you've got 1% just really on the fence, totally undecided about who they will vote for, that last-minute event often tips a very substantial proportion of the tiny group of undecideds, one way or the other. Well, I have no idea what the number's going to be. Maybe it goes up substantially. Maybe it goes down substantially. Maybe it doesn't change anything. Maybe it's about the same. Then it wouldn't have an impact. But suppose it spikes up because of something that's happened in the Eurozone, or perhaps it spikes down because it's naturally drifting down over time. That could affect a very close election. So that would be one that I would mention to you. And that you won't hear about it until 8:30 a.m. on the Friday before the Tuesday election.
How do you factor in the various demographic categories in predicting votes, such as women's vote, Hispanic vote, black votes, etc.?
Well, you rely on two things. One, the really solid exit poll survey that's done on election day, interviewing real voters and matching that up to the demographics in any particular state. That's an enormous sample, and it's refined after the election. It doesn't affect elections. It's not done by a pollster fly-by-night a week or two ahead of the election or a night before the election. So you look at the exit poll data. And then, beyond that, you look at census trends and the census study that's done of each election, and you look at the University of Michigan survey center research on each presidential election. You put all that together, you have a pretty good idea of where each subcategory has been. You never know precisely where it's going until the election itself, and then you analyze the new exit poll data. So we're always looking retrospectively, and we sometimes miss new trends on account of it. But that's inherent in the data.
Do you have any advice for somebody who wants to run for office?
Absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, I'm delighted you're interested. I hope that's a young person. And being 60, I define that as anybody 59 and under. So, if you're interested in running, I think that's great. We need good people to run for public office. But if you want to run, first of all, stay clean to the extent humanly possible. We're all human. We all make mistakes. Try to keep your mistakes hidden. And try to be clean, of course, above all. But second, can I suggest this to you? Don't start running 3 years after you get out of college. Go and get something done. Have your own life the way the founders intended. Have a profession that you enjoy, that gets you up early every morning, that's going to have to get you up for 40 or 50 years in your working life. But have something that is your foundation, your family plus your profession. You put those two together, you work at a community, you build something in that community, and then you have a reason to run, and you have built-in supporters who trust you because they've seen you operate in a profession, operate in charities in that town over a long period of time. I'm suspicious of people who, I understand why sometimes people do run in their 20s, but on the whole, I think it's better to run in your 30s or 40s or 50s, and then serve a discrete period of time, whatever it may be, 10, 12 years, maybe 15, and then go back to your hometown and your profession. That's what the founders intended. Don't become a permanent part of the political system, except to the extent that you are a voter and a good citizen who follows politics. I'm glad you like that.
Before I give you the last question and the last word, you're delightful, engaging, knowledgeable, and very accommodating.
I'll pay you later, Mr. President. He got me to agree to give a contribution to the college if you said all those good things.
We turned down very few contributions.
Yeah. You see what I mean?
You're a student of elections. Do elections work? Do we get what we deserve? Is democracy via elections a great process?
You know, my slogan, I wish I had one of my stickers. I bet my assistant, Tim Robinson, has one. Oh, here, we've got it right on the side. Now, I apologize. These are in UVA colors. We don't have your maroon and gold, but we can get them done in maroon and gold if you want. But that's the slogan I've had in my classroom since the mid-'70s. I give every student a sticker or a computer pad or something with "politics is a good thing" on it. Now, I get arguments. Anybody who majors in English tells me it should be "politics are good things." But generally, I get people, young people, saying, "Are you kidding? Politics, it's corrupt. It's smoke-filled rooms. It's money under the table and bribery. I don't want anything to do with it," which gives me the opening to say we couldn't exist as a nation without politics. A demographer once counted 230 different social, ethnic, racial, and religious groups living in the city of Chicago alone. The centrifugal forces would tear us apart as a country if we didn't have the oil that greases the creaky machinery of government, or the glue that holds together all those disparate parts of America. And the oil and the glue is called politics. It's the way we make our communities, our states, and our nation better places in which to live. So, as good citizens, and believing appropriately in what John F. Kennedy said in his inaugural address, that we should ask not what our country can do for us, but what we can do for our country. One thing that we can do for our country is to be better informed citizens, to vote after we have studied the issues and the candidates, and to participate in politics.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank all of you for coming.
Thank you. That was a good ending.